То есть получается, что так. Все-таки да. Да, нет, понимает она себя. Да. Женщина неизмеримо все, да, акстись. Я тебе, ну, она поняла себя, но ну, нет, наоборот, да. Да, да, да. Они становятся, да, понимают, не хотят, нет, наоборот. Ну да, да, да. Меня это не касается. Наоборот. Нет, надо так думать о себе. Обо мне так думать, а тебе не так думать. Нет, наоборот, да. Нет, это понятно. Это твои проблемы, ты можешь что угодно считать. Главное, чтобы я не забыл, что типа того. Да. То есть здесь одно только спасение, как ты скажешь. То есть один только вариант есть. Надо, да. Нарабатывать надо. Опять врет, блин, так нет, он о себе так говорил. А ты расслабленный, да, понимаю. Ну, он тебя понял, да. Ну, мне плевать. И так, и всякие едут. Ну, все начиналось-то так, да. Потому что вы не пойти, говоришь, не знаю. Ну, надо. Не знаю. Может, не миновал.
This method was developed by scientists at OpenAI and they called it GPT-2. The goal was to be able to perform this task with as little supervision as possible. This means that they unleashed this algorithm to read the internet, and the question was, what would the AI learn during this process? That is a tricky question. And to be able to answer it, have a look at this paper from 2017 where an AI was given a bunch of Amazon product reviews and the goal was to teach it to be able to generate new ones or continue a review when given one. Then something unexpected happened. The Finnish neural network used surprisingly few neurons to be able to continue these reviews. They noticed that the neural network has built up a knowledge of not only language, but also built a sentiment detector as well. This means that the AI recognized that in order to be able to continue a review, it not only needs to learn English, but also needs to be able to detect whether the review seems positive or not. If we know that we have to complete a review that seems positive from a small snippet, we have a much easier time doing it well. And now, back to GPT-2. As it was asked to predict the next character in sentences of not reviews, but of any kind, we asked what this neural network would learn. Not reviews, but of any kind. We asked, and now back to GPT-2. As it was asked to predict the next and is to learn. The Finnish neural network used surprisingly few neurons to be able to continue these reviews. They noticed that the neural network has built up a knowledge of not only language, but also built a sentiment detector as well. This means that the AI recognized that in order to be able to continue a review, it not only needs to learn English, but also needs to be able to detect whether the review seems positive or not. If we know that we have to complete a review that seems positive from a small snippet, we have a much easier time doing it well. And now, back to GPT-2. As it was asked to predict the next character in sentences of not reviews, but of any kind, we asked what this neural network would learn. Well, now we know that of course it learns whatever it needs to learn to perform the sentence completion properly. And to do this, it needs to learn English by itself, and that's exactly what it did. It also learned about a lot of topics to be able to discuss them well. What topics? Let's see. We gave it a try, and I was somewhat surprised when I saw that it was able to continue a 2-minute paper script even though it seems to have turned into a history lesson. What was even more surprising is that it could shoulder the lesson. What was even more surprising is that it could shoulder the 2-minute papers test, or in other words, I asked it to talk about the nature of fluid simulations, and it was caught cheating red-handed. But then it continued in a way that was not only coherent, but had quite a bit of truth to it. Note that there was no explicit instruction for the AI apart from it being unleashed on the internet and reading it. And now the next version appeared by the name GPT-3. This version is now more than 100 times bigger, so our first question is, how much better can an AI get if we increase the size of a neural network? Let's have a look together. These are the results on a challenging reading comprehension test as a function of the number of parameters. As you see, around 1.5 billion parameters, which is roughly equivalent to GPT-2, it has learned a great deal, but its understanding is nowhere near the level of human comprehension. However, as we grow the network, something incredible happens. Non-trivial capabilities start to appear as we approach 100 billion parameters. Look, it nearly matched the level of humans. My goodness! This was possible before, but only with neural networks that are specifically designed for a narrow task. In comparison, GPT-3 is much more general. Let's test that generality and have a look at 5 practical applications together. 1. OpenAI made this AI accessible to a lucky few people, and it turns out it has read a lot of things on the internet which contains a lot of code, so it can generate website layouts from a written description. 2. It also learned how to generate properly formatted plots from a tiny prompt written in plain English. Properly formatted plots from a tiny prompt written in plain English. Not just one kind, many kinds. Perhaps to the joy of technical PhD students around the world. 3. It can properly typeset mathematical equations from a plain English description as well. 4. It understands the kind of data we have in a spreadsheet, in this case population, and fills the missing parts correctly. And 5. It can also translate a complex legal text into plain language, or the other way around, in other words, it can also generate legal text from our simple descriptions. And as you see here, it can do much more. I left a link to all of these materials in the video description. However, of course, this iteration of GPT also has its limitations. For instance, we haven't seen the extent to which these examples are cherry-picked, or in other words, for every good output that we marvel at, there might have been one or a dozen tries that did not come out well. We don't exactly know. But the main point is that working with GPT-3 is a really peculiar process where we know that a vast body of knowledge lies within, but it only emerges if we can bring it out with properly written prompts. It almost feels like a new kind of programming that is open to everyone, even people without any programming or technical knowledge. If a computer is a bicycle for the mind, then GPT-3 is a fighter jet. Absolutely incredible. And to say that the paper is vast would be an understatement. We only scratch the surface for the mind without any programming or technical knowledge. If a computer is a bicycle for the mind, then GPT-3 is a fighter jet. Absolutely incredible. And to say that the paper is vast would be an understatement. We only scratch the surface of what it can do here, so make sure to have a look if you wish to know more about it. The link is available in the video description. I can only imagine what we will be able to do with GPT-4 and GPT-5 in the near future. What a time to be alive! What you see here is an instrumentation for a previous paper that we covered in this series, which was made by Weights and Biases. I think organizing these experiments really showcases the usability of their system. Weights and Biases provides tools to track your experiments in your deep learning projects. Their system is designed to save you a ton of time and money, and it is actively used in projects at prestigious labs such as OpenAI, Toyota Research, GitHub, and more. And the best part is that if you have an open source, academic, or personal project, you can use their tools for free. It really is as good as it gets. Make sure to visit them through wnb.com/papers or click the link in the video description to start. Dear fellow scholars, this is too much research. In reality, it tears along the muscle fibers. If we look at the approach like we can use our computers to run fluid simulations, simulate immersing a selection of objects into jelly, or tear meat in a way that, much like in reality, it tears along the muscle fibers. If we look at the abstract of this amazing new paper, we see this quoting. This allows us to trace high-speed motion of objects colliding against curved geometry to reduce the number of constraints, to increase the robustness of the simulation, and to simplify the formulation of the solver. What? This sounds impossible, but at the very least outrageously good. Let's look at 3 examples of what it can do and see for ourselves if it can live up to its promise. 1. It can simulate a steering mechanism full of joints and contact. Yup, an entire servo steering mechanism is simulated with a prescribed mass ratio. Loving it. I hereby declare that it passes inspection, and now we can take off for some off-roading. All of the movement is simulated really well, and wait a minute. Hold on to your papers. Are you seeing what I am seeing? Look, even the tire deformations are part of the simulation. Beautiful. And now let's do a stress test and race through a bunch of obstacles and see how well those tires can take it. At the end of the video, I will tell you how much time it takes to simulate all this, and note that I had to look 3 times because I could not believe my eyes. 2. Restitution. Or, in other words, we can smash an independent marble into a bunch of others and their combined velocity will be correctly computed. We know for a fact that the computations are correct because when I stop the video here, you can see that the marbles themselves are smiling. The joys of curved geometry and specular reflections. Of course, this is not true, because if we attempt to do the same with a classical earlier technique by the name position-based dynamics, this would happen. Yes, the velocities became erroneously large and the marbles jump off of the wire. And they still appear to be very happy about it. Of course, with the new technique, the simulation is much more stable and realistic. Talking about stability, is it stable only in a small-scale simulation, or can it take a huge scene with lots of interactions? Would it still work? Well, let's run a stress test and find out. Haha, this animation can run all day long and not one thing appears to behave incorrectly. Loving this. 3. It can also simulate these beautiful high-frequency rolls that we often experience when we drop a coin on a table. This kind of interaction is very challenging to simulate correctly because of the high-frequency nature of the motion and the curved geometry that interacts with the table. I would love to see a technique that algorithmically generates the sound for this. I could almost hear its sound in my head. Believe it or not, this should be possible and is subject to some research attention in computer graphics. The animation here was given, but the sounds were algorithmically generated. Listen. Let me know in the comments if you are one of our OG fellow scholars who were here when this episode was published hundreds of videos ago. So, how much do we have to wait to simulate all of these crazy physical interactions? We mentioned that the tires are stiff and take a great deal of computation to simulate properly. So, as always, all-nighters, right? Nope, look at that. Holy mother of papers. The car example takes only 18 milliseconds to compute per frame, which means 55 frames per second. Goodness, not only do we not need an all-nighter, we don't even need to leave for a coffee break. And the rolling marbles took even less, and woohoo! The high-frequency coin example needs only 1/3 of a millisecond, which means that we can generate more than 3000 frames with it per second. We not only don't need an all-nighter or a coffee break, we don't even need to wait at all. Now, at the start of the video, I noted that the claim in the abstract sounds almost outrageous. It is because it promises to be able to do more than previous techniques, simplify the simulation algorithm itself, make it more robust, and do all this while being blazing fast. If someone told me that there is a work that does all this at the same time, I would say that give me that paper immediately, because I do not believe a word of it. And yet, it really lives up to its promise. Typically, as a research field matures, we see new techniques that can do more than previous methods, but the price to be paid for it is in the form of complexity. The algorithms get more and more involved over time, and with that, they often get slower and less robust. The engineers in the industry have to decide how much complexity they are willing to shoulder to be able to simulate all of these beautiful interactions. Don't forget, these code bases have to be maintained and improved for many years, so choosing a simple base algorithm is of utmost importance. But here, none of these factors need to be considered because there is nearly no trade-off here. It is simpler, more robust, and better at the same time. It really feels like we are living in a science fiction world. What a time to be alive! Huge congratulations to scientists at NVIDIA and the University of Copenhagen for this. Don't forget, they could have kept the results for themselves, but they chose to share the details of this algorithm with everyone free of charge. Thank you so much for doing this. What you see here is a report for a previous paper that we covered in this series, which was made by Weights and Biases. Weights and Biases provides tools to track your experiments in your deep learning projects. Their system is designed to save you a ton of time and money, and it is actively used in projects at prestigious labs such as OpenAI, Toyota Research, GitHub, and more. And the best part is that if you have an open source, academic, or personal project, you can use their tools for free. It really is as good as it gets. Make sure to visit them through wnb.com/papers or click the link in the video description to start tracking your experiments in 5 minutes. Our thanks to Weights and Biases for their long-standing support and for helping us make better videos for you. Thanks for watching and for your generous support, and I'll see you next time.
Там что-то скипело, что будешь?
Wind, show me where to go. Your fault. This is nothing.
Dear
Любом. Бодренький. Огурцом. Гриб гоя. Я думаю, что ты сказал. А, ну ладно, так я. А, ну да, тоже знал. Что-то такое было где-то когда-то, знаете, по-моему, так было. Ну, так уж 10 лет уж не пьешь, что ли? Да. Спиртного алкоголя. Пальцы, если что, нет, да. Алкоголь пальцы веером. Больной, но как бы.
Start tracking your experiments in 5 minutes. Our thanks to Weights and Biases for their long-standing support and for helping us make better videos for you. Thanks for watching and for your generous support, and I'll see you next time.
Эй. Да что такое? О.
Fellow scholars, this is 2-minute papers with Dr. QIWI-Wallet. If you have been watching this series for a while, you know very well that I love learning algorithms and fluid simulations. But do you know what I like even better? Learning algorithms applied to fluid simulations, so I couldn't be happier with today's paper. We can create wondrous fluid simulations like the ones you see here by studying the laws of fluid motion from physics and write a computer program that contains these laws. As you see, the amount of detail we can simulate with these programs is nothing short of amazing. However, I just mentioned neural networks. If we can write a simulator that runs the laws of physics to create these programs, why would we need learning-based algorithms? The answer is in this paper that we have discussed about 300 episodes ago. The goal was to show a neural network video footage of lots and lots of fluid and smoke simulations and have it learn how the dynamics work to the point that it can continue and guess how the behavior of a smoke puff would change over time. We stop the video and it would learn how to continue it, if you will. This definitely is an interesting take, as normally we use neural networks to solve problems that are otherwise close to impossible to tackle. For instance, it is very hard, if not impossible, to create a handcrafted algorithm that detects cats reliably because we cannot really write down the mathematical description of a cat. However, these days we can easily teach a neural network to do that. But this task here is fundamentally different. Here, the neural networks are applied to solve something that we already know how to solve. Especially given that if we use a neural network to perform this task, we have to train it, which is a long and arduous process. I hope to have convinced you that this is a bad idea. Why would anyone bother to do that? Does this make any sense? Well, it does make a lot of sense. And the reason for that is that this training step only has to be done once, and afterwards, querying the neural network, that is, predicting what happens next in the simulation, runs almost immediately. This takes way less time than calculating all the forces and pressures in the simulation while retaining high-quality results. So we suddenly went from thinking that an idea is useless to being amazing. What are the weaknesses of the approach? Generalization. You see, these techniques, including a newer variant that you see here, can give us detailed simulations in real time or close to real time, but if we present them with something that is far outside of the cases that they had seen in the training domain, they will fail. This does not happen with our handcrafted techniques, only to AI-based methods. So, onwards to this new technique, and you will see in just a moment that a key differentiator here is that its generalization capabilities are just astounding. Look here. The predicted results match the true simulation quite well. Let's look at it in slow motion too, so we can evaluate it a little better. Looking great. But we have talked about superior generalization, so what about that? Well, it can also handle sand and goop simulations, so that's a great step beyond just water and smoke. And now, have a look at this one. This is a scene with the boxes it has been trained on. And now, let's ask it to try to simulate the evolution of significantly different shapes. Wow! It not only does well with these previously unseen shapes, but it also handles their interactions really well. But there is more. We can also train it on a tiny domain with only a few particles, and then it is able to learn general concepts that we can reuse to simulate a much bigger domain and also with more particles. Fantastic! But there is even more. We can train it by showing how water behaves on these water ramps, and then let's remove the ramps and see if it understands what it has to do with all these particles. Yes, it does. Now, let's give it something more difficult. I want more ramps. Yes. And now, even more ramps. Yes, I love it. Let's see if it can do it with sand too. Here's the ramp for the training, and let's try an hourglass now. Absolute witchcraft, and we are even being paid to do this. I can hardly believe this. The reason why you see so many particles in many of these views is because if we look under the hood, we see that the paper proposes a really cool graph-based method that represents the particles, and they can pass messages to each other over these connections between them. This leads to a simple, general, and accurate model that truly is a force to be reckoned with. Now, this is a great leap in neural network-based physics simulations, but of course, not everything is perfect here. Its generalization capabilities have their limits. For instance, over longer time frames, solids may get incorrectly deformed. However, I will quietly note that during my college years, I was also studying the beautiful Navier-Stokes equations, and even as a highly motivated student, it took several months to understand the theory and write my first fluid simulator. You can check out the thesis and the source code in the video description if you're interested. And to see that these neural networks could learn something very similar in a matter of days, every time I think about this, shivers run down my spine. Absolutely amazing. What a time to be alive. This episode has been supported by Lambda. If you're a researcher or a startup looking for cheap GPUs,
Where's my love? Что такое?
Want to know the most common mistake men make when approaching women, but most have no clue?
Ну нет, забудь все это, потому что меня не касается. Мне ноги надо, Саша. Ну, да. Об этом тоже можно. Ну, не можешь.
I don't want to play.
Yes, I do.
That's what happened. Here we go.
See? Come on now. Yes.
Sweet one.
Come on now. Come on now.
Sweet wonder. Oh, Jesus. The song of God. Oh, sweet, 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 sweet. Sweet wonder.
Come on now.
Sweet wonder. Oh, Jesus. You just do it wide open.
That's right. That's right. Come on with it. Yeah, I hear you.
Take him to church, Steve. Like, this lady, don't do that. Don't do that. Right, don't do that. She knows better. Take it on back to Memphis. Take it back. You know. Oh, that old school. Yeah. There you go.
さあここまで第4試合、全4試合お付き合いいただきましたところで、続きましての本日のメインイベントを行います。ただいまより本日のメインイベント、関東ロボットヘビー級選 選手権試合格闘技ルール4分2ラウンドを行います。はじめに青コーナーヨゴラーザ入場。やってまいりました。関西四天王。関西四天王。あの関西四天王の関西四天王。なんですって？いや、関西四天王。あの有名な。どういうことでしょう。どういうことだってばよ。いや、四天王。関西四天王なんですね。さあ、しかしこのヨゴロザ実力の方はと言いますとかなり高い。冗談じゃなく強い。かなりの実力者である関西四天王。ロープを越えてきますよ。おお。また見てできるのかのレジよりすごいよ。青コーナー挑戦者関西四天王降臨。ヨゴラザー。関西四天王の頂点は俺だと言わんばかりです。この気合。
Если вы видеоблогер, вам пора быть на моем месте, в Яндекс.Дзене. Например, вот здесь мог быть...
Dear fellow scholars, this is 2-minute papers with Dr. Károly Zsolnai Fehér. I recommend that you immediately start to hold on to your papers because this work is about creating physics simulations in higher than 3 spatial dimensions. The research in this paper is used to create this game that takes place in a 4D world, and it is just as beautiful as it is confusing. And I'll be honest, the more we look, the less this world seems to make sense for us. So let's try to understand what is happening here together. You see an example of a 4-dimensional simulation here. The footage seems very cool, but I can't help but notice that sometimes things just seem to disappear into the ether. In other cases, they suddenly appear from nowhere. How can that happen? Let's decrease the dimensionality of the...
Это же проекция, как двухмерная проекция. Не так вот, она не исчезла ладонь-то, она бумажка не исчезает, видишь, ножницы, ты видишь палочку, на самом деле ножницы. Прикольно, я помню,
the problem, and suddenly we will easily understand how this is possible. Here we take a 2D slice of our 3D world, start the simulation, and imagine that we only see what happens on this slice. We see nothing else, just the slice. That sounds fine, things move around freely, nothing crazy going on, and suddenly, hey, things slowly disappear. The key in this example is that luckily we can also look at the corresponding 3D simulation on your display. We can see not only the 2D slice, but everything around it. So the playbook is as follows. If something disappears, it means that it went back or forward in the 3rd dimension. So what we see on the slice is not the object itself, but its intersection with the 3D object. The smaller the intersection, the more we see the side of the sphere, and the object appears to be smaller, or even better, look, the ball is even floating in the air. When we look at the 3D world, we see that this only appears like that, but in reality what happens is that we see the side of the sphere. Really cool. We now understand that colliding can create a mirage that seems as if objects were suddenly receding, disappearing, and even floating. Just imagine how confusing this would be if we were this 2D character. Actually, you don't even need to imagine that, because this piece of research work was made to be able to create computer games where we are a 3D character in a 4D world, so we can experience all of these confusing phenomena. However, we get some help in decoding this situation, because even though this example runs in 3D, when something disappears into the ether, we can move along the 4th dimension and find it. So good. Floaty behavior can also happen, and now we know exactly why. But wait, in this 3D domain, even more confusing, new things happen. As you see here, in 3D, cubes seem to be changing shape, and the reason for this is the same. We just see a higher dimensional object's intersection with our lower dimensional space. But the paper does not only extend 3D rigid body dynamic simulations to not only 2D, but to any higher dimension. You see, this kind of footage can only be simulated because it also proposes a way to compute collisions, static and kinetic friction, and similar physical forces in arbitrary dimensions. And now, hold on to your papers because this framework can also be used to make amazing, mind-bending game puzzles where we can miraculously unbind seemingly impossible configurations by reaching into the fourth dimension. This is one of those crazy research works that truly cannot be bothered by recent trends and hot topics. And I mean it in the best possible way. It creates its own little world and invites us to experience it, and it truly is a sight to behold. I can only imagine how one of these soft body or fluid simulations would look in higher dimensions, and boy, would I love to see some follow-up papers perform something like this. If you wish to see more, make sure to have a look at the paper in the video description, and I also put a link to one 4D game that is under development and one that you can buy and play today. Huge congratulations to Mark ten Bosch, who got this single-author paper accepted to SIGGRAPH, perhaps the most prestigious computer graphics conference. Not only that, but I am pretty sure that I have never seen
Деньги получать надо за это. Надо еще устареть, хорошо, да.
a work from an indie game developer presented as a SIGGRAPH technical paper. Bravo! This episode has been supported by Weights and
Я не хочу этим заниматься сейчас. Любой дурак сейчас может сесть и нажать. Ух ты. Так, Массагеза. 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 Опять что у меня предлагают покупку 19 долларов. Какая зачем это 19 долларов? Давай 19 долларов сюда. Ты нафиг это? 19 долларов. Не хватает. Ну нет, это для этого самой штучки. Правильно, правильно. Бонус. Окей. Что, завтра пятница? Нет, наверное. Ну это что такое? Что за вообще? Что за глупость, блин? Как запретить эту подписку? Да. Он даже не интересуется, на ком я там. Ну, что такое? Ну, допустим. Что мне надо отключать, что ли? Это всё? Нет. Будем что подключать. Ну, задерживаешь ты. Я все понял, понимаю все. Нет, это ж такое протяжение. Как это сделать-то? Как заблокировать? Нет, не говори, не надо, не говори. У меня купили. Ничего. Ну как-то сделать. Что это такое, блин? Он еще даже спрашивать меня не будет, наверное. Возьмет, снимет вот. Деньги туда положишь, да. Ну нет, народ, нет. Ну нет, нет. Не буду туда. А, ну нет, это вообще другое.